That night, they left the house carrying lanterns, flashlights, and the field guide. It was weird to go looking for fairies with their mother in tow and Simon helping Aunt Lucy along. Up the hill they went, and then they carefully made their way down the other side. Jared thought he heard a whisper of, "Clever is as clever does," but it might have been only his memory or the wind. The grove was lit with dozens upon dozens of sprites, whirring through the air, twinkling like giant fireflies, alighting on tree branches and settling in the grass. Elves sat on the ground, many more than the 3 the children had seen on their first visit, all clad in the deep colors of autumn, as though to camouflage themselves with the forest. The elves went quiet as the small group of humans made their way to the center of the clearing. There, standing among all those seated, was the green-eyed elf, her expression unreadable. Beside her stood the leaf-horned elf, looking stern, and red-haired Lorengorm, who was smiling. Thinking of Thimbletack, Jared made an awkward bow. The others followed his example. "We brought the book," Jared said, and held it out to the green-eyed elf. She smiled. "That is well. We must abide by our promises, and had you not, Simon would have had to stay with us for a very long time." Simon shivered and stepped closer to Mallory. Jared scowled. "But since you have done so," she continued, "we wish to return it to you for safekeeping." "What?" Mallory said. Jared was astonished. "You have proven that humans may use the knowledge it contains for good. Therefore, we return the guide to you." Lorengorm stepped forward. "We also wish to give you some measure of our gratitude for restoring peace to these lands. To that end, we offer you a boon." "A boon?" Hogsqueal puffed out his chest. "What do I get? How come these ninny hammers get a reward when I'm the one that defeated Mulgarath?" Several of the elves began to laugh, and Thimbletack gave Hogsqueal a stern look. "Figures he wasn't coming along to be supportive," Mallory said. "So what would you like, little hobgoblin?" asked the green-eyed elf. "Well," Hogsqueal said, putting a finger to his mouth as if considering, "I'd like some kind of metal, definitely. Gold, with fearsome killer of ogres on it. No, wait. How about supreme slayer of monsters? Or is that all?" asked Lorengorm. "It should say supreme beetlehead," Simon whispered to Jared. "I don't think so," said the hobgoblin. "I want a victory feast in my honor, and it should have quail's eggs. I love those, and pigeon baked in a pie shell, and barbecued cat." "We'll consider your requests," the green-eyed elf said, barely hiding a smile behind her delicate hand. "But now I must ask the children to name the desire of their heart." Jared looked at his brother and sister. At first they seemed thoughtful, and then smiles started to grow on their faces. Jared glanced back at his mother, who still seemed a bit confused, and his great aunt, her face full of hope. "We would like our great-great-uncle, Arthur Spiderwick, to have a choice whether to stay in Fairy or not." "You understand," Lorengorm said, "that if he chooses to return to the mortal world, the first time his foot touches the earth, He will become dust and ash. Jared nodded. I understand. We have anticipated your request, said the green-eyed elf. With a wave of her hand, the trees parted, and Byron stepped through. On his back was Arthur Spiderwick. Jared heard the others gasp behind him. Arthur smiled at Jared briefly, and this time Jared noticed that his eyes were like Lucinda's, both sharp and kind. Arthur sat on the griffin awkwardly and petted him with a kind of awe. Then he looked over at Mallory and Simon. He adjusted his glasses. You are my great-great-niece and nephew, aren't you? He said softly. Jared didn't mention that he had a brother and a sister. Jared nodded. He wondered if there was any way he could apologize for the things he had said earlier. He wondered what Arthur thought of him. I'm Simon, said Simon. This is Mallory, and this is our mom. Simon looked at Lucinda and hesitated. I'm glad to meet you, said Arthur. You three children clearly have my inquisitive blood running through your veins. You might have had cause to regret it. He shook his head wryly. It seems to have gotten you into a lot of scrapes. Luckily, you three seem far more adept at getting yourselves out of trouble than I ever was. He smiled again, and this time his smile wasn't the least bit tentative. It was a wide grin that made him look very unlike the man in the painting. We're glad to see you too, Jared said. We want to give your book back to you. My field guide, Arthur said. He took it from Jared's hands and started flipping through it. Look at this. Who did these sketches? I did, Jared said, his voice as soft as a whisper. I know they aren't very good. Nonsense, Arthur said. This is fine work. I predict that you are going to be a great artist someday. Really? Jared said. Arthur nodded. Really? Thimbletack walked up to Arthur's shoes. Good to see you, my old friend, but there are some things to mend. Here is Lucinda, who you know. She is not as she was long ago. Arthur's breath caught as he finally recognized her. She must look so old to him, Jared thought. He tried to picture his mother as a young woman looking at an elderly version of him, but it was too hard, too sad. Lucinda smiled, and tears ran down her cheeks. Daddy, she said, you look just the way you did the day you left. Arthur made a move to dismount. No, Lucinda said, you'll turn to dust. Leaning on her cane, she walked closer to where he stood. I'm sorry for all of the sadness I caused you and your mother, he said. I'm sorry I tried to trick the elves. I should have never taken the risk. I've always loved you, Lucy. I always wanted to come home. You are home now, said Lucinda. Arthur shook his head. Elven magic has kept me alive too long. I have lived past the span of my years. It is my time to go, but seeing you, Lucy, I can go without sorrow. I just got you back, she said. You can't die now. Arthur bent down and spoke to her. Soft words that Jared could not hear before he stepped off the griffin and into her embrace. As Arthur's foot touched the ground, his body turned to dust and then smoke. It swirled around Jared's great aunt and then whirled up into the night sky and was gone. Jared turned to Lucinda, expecting to see her crying, but her eyes were dry. She stared up at the stars and smiled. Jared slid his hand into hers. "It's time for us to go home," Aunt Lucinda said. Jared nodded. He thought about everything that had happened, all of the things that he had seen, and suddenly realized how much he still had to sketch. After all, he was only at the beginning. Here ends the tale of the Grace children. Through field, cave, and forest, this yarn has unspun, with our heroes victorious and evil undone. Yet all is not merry as we reach this end, and must bid farewell to a father, guide, friend. Though Arthur is taken, what's given is vast. His beloved Lucinda is safe home at last. Hogsqueal has eaten, the Graces can rest, and Thimbletack's back to what brownies do best. With everyone happy and no longer vexed, one question needs answering. What happens next? Are there more ogres and dragons to slay? Is there more mayhem, perhaps, on the way? Ask Tony and Holly. They'll swear that it's true, but you still won't believe what's coming for you. For the time is upon us. The guide is at hand. Soon Spiderwick's opus will be read through the land. So keep your eyes open, and when you see it, do choose it, because knowledge is good. Just beware how you use it.